Great.
Welcome, faithful politics listeners and viewers. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and your co-host, your faithful host, Josh Bertram can't be here this week, but in his place, we have Karen Tumulty. She is a Washington Post Deputy Editorial Page Editor and columnist, here to talk to us about abortion and kind of the politics surrounding it. So thank you, Karen, for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And I like to do this with a lot of our journalists when we get people from the news here on our program that are kind enough to give us their time. I just want to say thank you for just all the work that you do. We've had a lot of different journalists on, and I can imagine it's a thankless profession.
Sometimes, yes.
So, I mean, but it's like I was just thinking about this the other day when you see these images from Ukraine, or you see what's happening on January 6th, or you see like the stuff that goes on in the world, that the only reason we know about it are because of people in your profession. And, I think people kind of forget that sometimes. And so if nothing else, this show is very journalist friendly. We've had journalists from all walks of life. We've had Breitbart, Washington Post, and others. So just thank you for that. But moving to the topic at hand, I'd love for you just to kind of give us the state of where are we at with regards to abortion rights in this country. Maybe that's a good landing or setting off spot.
Well, everybody is waiting for the Supreme Court to issue its opinion in this case of a Mississippi law and Mississippi is directly challenging Roe versus Wade, the 1973 decision that made abortion legal nationally. And if the court goes as far as a lot of people think they will, which is to actually, overturn Roe versus Wade, then what we're going to see is the country is going to become, on this issue, really two countries. A lot of conservative states are going to move to drastically restrict abortion in their, within their boundaries. But also what you're seeing is a lot of more liberal states moving the other way and actually trying to put in protections for abortion rights. And the thing is that public opinion, measured pretty broadly, has not really changed on this issue at all since Roe v. Wade was decided in January of 1973. Most people, and we're talking 60%, sometimes upwards, believe that abortion should be there in the case, in particular, of how it is normally, occurs, which is relatively early in a pregnancy, the first 13 weeks. You get past that, and people do become very ambivalent about it. And the further into a pregnancy, the more people do want to see restrictions. And they also want to see restrictions in certain aspects of it. For instance, whether a minor should be able to get an abortion without her parents knowing about it and approving of it. Those kinds of issues, which kind of come up on the sidelines of the central question. Again, people are pretty united on. And that is one of the reasons why, Bill Clinton, who came up with the formulation when he was running for president, that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. That was politically genius. And the other thing is, we've also skirted one of the big issues, which is, why can't we make it to where fewer unintended pregnancies occur, whether it is through education or whether it is through better, easier forms of contraception. And that's, one of these things that both sides agree on, and yet not a lot gets done on that.
Yeah, it's really weird. Like when we spoke with Abby Johnson a couple of weeks ago, one of the discussion points that we had was, kind of what the center of the argument really is. Is it viability? Is it, kind of where life begins? Is it pain threshold? And what's interesting, based on my understanding of a lot of these laws, it's centered around viability. There seems to be arguments about, okay, well, at 13 weeks, at 6 weeks, at whatever, that the fetus is viable. And I'm curious to kind of get your take on what your sense of the arguments are from all these different states about, restricting abortion access.
Well, on the viability question, so much has changed since 1973. There are techniques that have been developed of, keeping premature babies alive at earlier and earlier stages, although short of inventing some kind of artificial lung, you haven't seen it push any earlier than, say, 22 weeks. But there's also the technology that has gone along with pregnancies, where I am the proud grandmother of my first grandchild.
Yay.
And yes, but the sonogram pictures that my son and daughter-in-law had and shared with us. I mean, people walk around, they can see this, they can see a baby developing. And I think that has also kind of, again, it's not just viability. People just know a lot more than they used to about the development of a fetus.
Yeah, that's true. And I'm curious about your take on the politics of all this. I mean, in my view, that if in June, when the Supreme Court opinions come out, if they significantly restrict or overturn Roe v. Wade, in my opinion, I felt like that's going to activate a lot of Democrats. What are you hearing?
Well, it has always been that abortion has been a voting issue for one side, but not the other. That people who are ardently anti-abortion, that's a deal breaker for them when it comes to a candidate. But people who are, ardently in favor of abortion rights, also generally that is, that's sort of one in the smorgasbord of issues. I think that could very much potentially change. Although I have talked to pollsters. I was talking to Celinda Lake, who's a Democratic pollster who she's really good at focus groups. And she said that, when it became clear, when Texas passed an incredibly restrictive abortion law that the Supreme Court didn't stop, when the Mississippi case got onto the radar, that she would find in her focus groups that people were very, very anxious about these developments, but that they subside pretty soon. People in focus groups would say, oh, well, that's just Texas, or that's just Mississippi. I think that the court decision, if it goes that way, could change that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm wondering if the opposite, or if the inverse could also be true, if they don't overturn Roe v. Wade and allow the precedent to stand, would that activate Republicans? I mean, I think going into the midterms, Democrats are already looking at, probably not hoping, but are looking at, losing the House. So would the Supreme Court not overturning Roe activate Republicans to come out in force?
I think Republicans are pretty activated as it is.
It's true.
I mean, you see right now that, every bit of data, at least that I have seen, is that the Republican electorate is much more engaged, much more motivated than the Democratic electorate. These things are always hard to predict in midterm elections. In 2018, a lot of people came out who don't normally get activated in Democratic, in midterm elections. Young people, a number of, it's always difficult, for instance, to get unmarried women to the polls. They vote Democratic if you can get them there. And so in some cases, communities of color, they showed up for a midterm election in 2018 when they normally don't. Pollsters call them surge voters. But those are the people that Democrats are really struggling with right now to get them excited about the election, or even in some cases aware there's an election.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, now you wrote an article recently called "Democratic Governors Look for Ways to Protect Abortion Rights," focused on some of the challenges that Governor Whitmer has there in Michigan. What's going on there in Michigan?
So what Governor Whitmer is in her situation, and it's a situation that you see with governors in a number of states. You see Democratic governors with Republican legislatures. And in her case, you see that in Pennsylvania, you see it in North Carolina. So these are governors who know that they are going to receive legislation from their conservative legislatures that they can veto them. In some cases they can, the legislature can override or not. Governor Whitmer in Michigan, who is up for re-election this year, she's one of those Democrats who was elected in that 2018 surge, has taken a novel and particularly aggressive stance, and one that her state constitution gives her the power to do as governor, where she knows that these anti-abortion bills are going to come if Roe versus Wade falls. So she has filed a lawsuit and gone directly to the state Supreme Court and asked them to rule directly on whether the right to abortion is protected in the Michigan Constitution through due process or, whatever. The Michigan State Supreme Court is elected. It is marginally more Democratic than Republican. She doesn't know how quickly or even whether they will engage on this, but that she's like, going for any arrow in her quiver here.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I mean, if she's able to be successful in her efforts, I mean, that would somewhat insulate her from any potential ruling with the Dobbs v. Jackson case, should that affect anything, right?
Yeah, she is essentially asking for a Roe versus Wade decision that is Michigan specific.
Got it. Wow, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, and I noticed that. So there's another state, Kentucky, with Governor Bashir, I think that's how you say his name, who's a Democrat and has a primarily Republican-led legislature system there, and they're having some issues too. Are you following the?
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Now, my understanding of the situation there, and yes, Kentucky, very, very red state. So there had been some anti-abortion legislation that the governor was previously the attorney general. As governor, he has decided not to carry this challenge, in court cases against this legislation. He has decided as governor that he is not going to defend the state law. So the attorney general, who is a Republican, is essentially trying to do an end run around the governor so that he can defend these abortion restrictions. And that is a case that is going to go to the Supreme Court. And so the question is going to be whether the Attorney General has, a Republican Attorney General has the right to circumvent a Democratic Attorney General. It can circumvent a governor who is in favor of abortion rights. This is how we are, this is how narrowly we are slicing things here. I mean, individual states have individual circumstances, and sometimes it is really hard to follow along sort of the state of play in so many states.
Yeah, it is really confusing, and shameless plug for Washington Post. You guys have a really great like website that I'll put the links in the show notes that goes state by state, that shows like what the different states abortion laws are and kind of like their status. So you guys did a really good job with that. Now last September you wrote another abortion related article that was an opinion piece that said Republicans will rue the Texas abortion law. And I'm curious, kind of like looking at that now, and comparing it to sort of the state of play, in our current times, like do you have any, I don't know, adjustments? Do you still kind of hold true?
I still believe this issue, at least the tack that some of the more conservative abortion foes are taking, is not a political winner overall. In some cases, for instance, in Texas, you can file a lawsuit against someone who assists in an abortion. This essentially turns ordinary citizens into people who can squeal on their neighbors. I just don't think people are that comfortable with that sort of thing. It's also interesting. I just finished 4.5 years working on a biography of Nancy Reagan. And one of the things that I dealt with in all of this was Ronald Reagan's decision in his first year as California governor in 1967. One of the first things that the state legislature laid on his plate was the most liberal law in the country that effectively legalized abortion in California. Most people wouldn't think Ronald Reagan would be your guy for citing the most liberal abortion law in the country. He did. He later said he regretted it, but he did. And for a while, before Roe versus Wade, there was a famous flights from Texas, like that. Women knew that there was a certain flight on a Friday night or something, that they were flying into California from just all over the country because they couldn't get abortions in their home, in the states where they lived. We're likely to see another system like that again, where this is a situation that really penalizes women who don't have the resources to do that, or they can't leave. They have other children at home. They can't sort of leave them and take off across whatever state line they need to take off.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. So so when I was talking to Abby Johnson, she runs an organization in Texas that provides support to women who want to have an abortion, but they've convinced them otherwise. So long story short, like they provide clothes, food, car, whatever, like just they try to get them prepared so they can take care of this child. And I had asked her, like that's just one organization, like, and it's the first time I've heard of it, and I'm sure there's others, but are there enough nonprofits like that can help support the number of children that would be born, maybe, and the mom can't take care of them. So like, what effect, so if Roe gets overturned, like what effect would that have on I don't know, our social programs, our I don't know, our welfare? Just, I mean, in my opinion, I'm imagining is going to be a pretty huge burden. Like, what's your take?
I mean, good for these organizations that provide some help, but the costs of raising a child, are just absolutely enormous. And it's, women often have to, step back from their own jobs. I do think that, adoption laws need to be reformed, and it needs to be made easier, but these are not, these are not things that get mandated by law. There are, many of the same people who are pushing for the overturn of Roe versus Wade. They're conservatives. They don't like expanding food stamps. They don't like expanding social programs, those sorts of things.
Yeah, no, that's true. And furthermore, so staying in Texas, there's a case recently where a woman was charged with murder for a self-induced abortion, and I think those charges were dropped. But
yeah, the DA backed off of that one.
Yeah.
He realized that again was not a good play on his part.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't help but think that he backed off on that one, but the next one possibly, and I just couldn't. I can't imagine just a woman being in prison for a self-induced abortion or whatever the case may be. Because if I were a litigator, I would be, okay, well, like, are we now saying that humans, like, so an unborn child is now a human that's entitled to all the rights and privileges as you and I, and maybe that would be in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, there's going all the way back to Roe v. Wade, I think people who are, abortion opponents have generally stopped short at charging the woman with proposing to charge the woman with a crime. You saw that Donald Trump got tripped up on this in the 2016 campaign when he was asked about it. They will go after the providers. And in Texas, they will go after now anybody who assists with the abortion. But criminalizing the woman has always, at least politically speaking, been a step too far.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, so the last question I have for you, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, so feel free to not want to answer this, because like when we when I spoke with the Professor Eric Berger, our last episode, about kind of the future of abortion in the country, I just asked him if what he thought about the likelihood of Roe v. Wade being overturned. And I made it easy for him. I said, do you think there's a greater or less than 50% chance of it being overturned? And he said he thought there was a greater than 50% chance of it being overturned. Kind of what that looks like, may vary depending on how they decide to write their opinion. But I'm curious to kind of get your take on, if reading the tea leaves, talking to people, like, do you think there's a greater or lesser than 50% chance of it being overturned?
I think that with the makeup of this Supreme Court, I think there's probably a greater than 50% chance. And it may not happen this case. It may be something down the line. But I think you listen to the justices during the oral arguments, and it was pretty clear what direction most of them want to go.
Yeah, it's true. Well, thank you, Karen, so much for giving us your time. That was really, really awesome, and I appreciate your insight, and thank you again for just the wonderful work that you do as a journalist, and the great work Washington Post does. So, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll talk to you later.